Hello, everyone. Welcome to RJ Julia. My name is Jackie. I'm your event host tonight, along with Mary in the back. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest tonight, Pam Jenoff. A little bit about Pam before we get started. Pam is the author of several historical fiction novels, some including New York Times bestsellers, Codename Sapphire, The Lost Girls in Paris, and The Orphan's Tale. An additional fun fact I learned upstairs is that she also has 6 pets. And I hope that I recalled this correctly. You can correct me if I'm wrong. A dog, 2 cats, a rabbit, a bird, and a lizard.
Wow.
She's got a full house. Pam joins us tonight to celebrate her newest novel, Last Twilight in Paris, which is a tale of love, mystery, and resilience inspired by true events in World War II Paris. This has been described as a fast-paced and vibrant wartime tale of holding on to love against the odds and learning to fight for the truth. You'll definitely want to get your hands on this one, and I, for one, cannot wait to hear more of the behind-the-scenes details. We will have time for a Q&A after the event, as well as a signing line over on the, around the corner here. And if you haven't had a chance to get your book yet, I see a lot of them in the audience already, which is great. But if not, we will have them available at the registers after the event as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Pam.
Thank you for that warm introduction. I think I can see everybody. If that's okay. Although I'm going to try and not go down the stairs. I definitely said so I did not do that. Hi, I'm so happy to be back here with you. So I was here, I think, Lost Girls of Paris in 2019, and I see a few people nodding. Who was here? Does anyone? Okay, so I hope your memories are terrible because you won't. I don't want you to remember my jokes. I recycle a lot of material, but I'm spectacularly happy to be back. I had such warm memories of everyone here and of the store. So thank you for having me back, and thank you for coming out. Thank you to the weather for not being terrible, right? So we could do this in February. And I'm also really overjoyed to be here with you because today is my actual launch day. So the book came out today.
Oh, wow.
So I was at my hometown store last night in Haddonfield, New Jersey, but I didn't speak there. I just sort of signed for everybody, and hugged people. So you are the very first people with whom I'm getting to speak about this book. And I'll do my best. So I'm debating if I want to sit down, but then I can't see you. So I'm going to stand up. So before I get into this book, into Last Twilight in Paris, I'd like to share, since I have not met most of you before, a little bit about my background. And this would be both how I came to write these books and how I came to be a writer. Is that okay? Okay,
Great.
And then I promise I'll talk about this. This is my 13th. So, so my journey to becoming a writer began, I haven't done the math in a while, but it's like almost 30 years ago, when I was sent to Krakow, Poland as a diplomat for the US State Department. So I didn't go to Poland to work on the war. I actually went there to stamp visas and passports and help American citizens who got in trouble abroad, because that's what most junior diplomats do. But when I got to Poland, it was this unique moment right after communism. They had just emerged from years without free speech. And so they had never resolved any of their issues from World War II. And I won't go too deeply into that here today, but you're welcome to ask me about it during the Q&A. And so I arrived in Poland in 1996, and I was a young woman in my early 20s. So now you can all do the math and figure out exactly how old I am. I'm 53. But when I went to Poland, I went halfway around the world alone, no family. And if you think back to those days, we had no cell phones, we had no internet. And so I was truly isolated in Central Europe. And I happened to be Jewish. And so I did what I thought, like the nice Jewish girl would do, which is I gravitated toward the surviving Jewish community that still lived in Krakow, the elderly folks. And I went to their shul every Friday night, and I was in their community for more than 2 years, and they really became like grandparents to me. And so the U.S. government saw that I had a relationship with the people, and they said, "You work on all that stuff from the war." And so it became my full-time job working on Holocaust issues. When Elie Wiesel was upset, and I saw his wife just passed. When Wiesel was upset because Polish scouts had put up crosses and stars on the field where his family died, I would go out there and try and work it out. Or when Hillary Clinton wanted to tour the camps when she was first lady, I spent a week there with the Secret Service. It was like a very grassroots kind of job. It was very rewarding work, but also incredibly difficult. And my own life over there was also very conflicted because on one hand, it was such a rich experience to be Jewish and able to live freely in that part of the world. But on the other hand, I was living right on top of the war. I had to drive past the camp from Schindler's List to get my car fixed at the mechanic. And so it was very hard to figure out how to live in an appropriately solemn way for what had taken place there, but yet not have my own life feel like a graveyard. So I did not continue on in diplomatic service. I actually came back to the United States and I went to law school, but I was very moved by those experiences over there. And I knew I wanted to write about them. And I knew it was going to be in a novel. So you might say, how did you know that? Going back even further in time, I was one of those little kids, those little pishers who always wanted to be a writer. And it was never short stories. It was never poems. I always wanted that book. But for all the years when I was in school and at time, I never got started on my dream. Like you all know, many of you are like nodding a little bit because you have a project in your closet that you kind of can't get off the ground. And for me, that was the novel. The turning point in my life was 9/11. I went to law school and I graduated and I started practicing at a big firm in Philadelphia. And I started practicing as a lawyer on September 4th, 2001. It was a Tuesday. And 1 week later, 9/11 happened. And I had this life epiphany. It sounds really flip. I don't mean it that way. But I call my life epiphany, dear God, I don't want to die at the law firm. And what I meant by that was I had this lifelong dream of being a writer. And if I had been a 9/11 victim, I never would have realized that dream. And I didn't have forever. So I took a night course at Temple in Philadelphia. I teach at Rutgers. They hate this part of the story. But I took a course at Temple, and it was called Write Your Novel This Year. Right? They have later changed that to Write Your Novel This Month, which sounds really scary. I would not take that. But I took Write Your Novel This Year, and I started working on my first book. And it opened for me, and I promise I'm coming to last Twilight in Paris, but it opened for me, as many books do, with an image. I saw a woman walking a child across Krakow's main square, and she was pretending this child was her younger brother. He was a child of great rabbinic lineage, and she was trying to keep safe. And this you may recognize if you've ever read it. It's the opening scene of my first book, The Commandant's Girl. As I was writing that, something very serendipitous happened. I was on an Amtrak train from Washington to Philadelphia, and I met two very well-known Holocaust survivors, man and wife. They've both since passed on, and I don't name them because I don't know if they would mind. And when I said to the woman, oh, I'm writing a book set in Krakow during the war, she said to me, then surely you know the story of Krakow's Jewish resistance movement. And I froze because I had just come back from 2.5 years of living in Krakow, and I had never heard of the resistance movement there. Everyone who was part of that resistance died during the war. I went back to Poland and I found this rich history on the very streets where I had lived and worked, and that became the underpinning for Commandant's Girl. Now, I would like to tell you that it was a hop, skip, and a jump from there to R.J. Julia. But in fact, it was 5 years and 39 publisher rejections until the last known publisher on earth. And I should stop calling them that because they are my current publisher. They made a tiny little offer for Commandant's Girl, and away we went. Interestingly, April 8th will be 20 years since that offer is coming out. And so, but now things are okay, and people in publishing sometimes act like they knew it all along. And I have rejection letters from all of them. Of course, the other catch I must tell you about when I had this inspired post 9/11 writer plan was, although I was now a serious writer, I was also a new attorney, at a big city law firm, and I had $1,000 a month in student loan debt to repay. So I couldn't go sit and write in a castle, I had to like, be serious. So I used to write my books from 5 to 7 in the morning every day before I went to the firm. Now, you heard about my 6 pets, but I also have 3 teenagers who don't drive yet. And so, I see all the heads, that I don't get 5 to 7 in the morning anymore because high school starts early. So I've had to find other ways. Anyhow, I wrote Commandant's Girl, a number of books in between. You may ask me about any of them during the Q&A, but if you go to spoil it, I will shush you. So let's talk about Last Twilight in Paris, which just came out today. In order to describe to you how I got the idea for this book, let me tell you about the idea, and let me tell you how I get ideas for books, because I actually go looking for them. And that is, I am inspired by the Holocaust survivors I lived among in Poland, but I don't write their stories. Those are not mine to write. My books are love songs to them, and my scenes are infused with their spirit, but I don't write their stories. And so when I'm trying to figure out what to write next, I am looking for what I call the gasp and the questions. Because if I can find a piece of history that's so untold that it makes me gasp after more than a quarter century of working with the war, then I'm hopeful I'm onto something you'll feel the same way about. And so in the case of Last Twilight in Paris, it was learning about the store in Paris, actually called Levitan. And in real life, now I'm going to tell you, in my book, I call it a department store. In actual history, it was a furniture store, but it's a grand store right in the middle of Paris. And the Germans took it over. And they imprisoned Jews there. The Jews had to live on the top floor, and they were forced to sort the plunder from Jewish homes. So these great big moving trucks, they used French moving companies, would like roll into the back dock, and they would unload all of the goods they had pillaged from Jewish homes. And the people who were in prison there, they had to sort the goods, right? They sorted, they repaired. Some of the goods were sent to Germany, but many of the goods were displayed in the store, and they were sold or given to German officers who shopped in the store. And it was this remarkable history that I had never really heard of, that inspired this book. So in this book, it begins actually in 1953 England. It's in Henley, which is, just outside London. It's a little town. And we meet Louise. And Louise is a wife and a mom. And Louise did great things as a Red Cross volunteer during the war. And she is trying to readjust to domestic life, right? She's trying to just fit back in. This is a notion that fascinates me because I spent, about 5 years abroad collectively. And when you come back from experiences, you're not the same shape, right? You're just not the same shape when you go back to your regular life. And so I was fascinated by this notion of Louise, who had done all these things during the war and was now kind of just trying to make her peace with the life women had in the early 1950s. And Louise is volunteering in a thrift shop, and she finds a necklace. Has anyone ever heard of a Mizpah charm? Okay, you may have seen it and not known. It is a necklace. It has a heart on it. Sometimes it's heart-shaped or sometimes it's a coin, like round, but it's got a heart on it. And the necklace breaks into 2 charms, okay, right? You know that necklace.
Yeah.
And it has an inscription. It has a biblical inscription on it. It says, "The Lord watch over thee and me when we are apart from each other." It's biblical. And I'm paraphrasing there. And so Louise finds one of the half charms with the words "watch" and "me" on it. And she's instantly riveted because she knows she saw not just a necklace like this, but this very necklace during the war. So the story goes back to the war. Louise was a Red Cross volunteer, and she went over to take parcels to the POWs. They were delivering parcels. And she was accompanied by a woman named Franny. And Franny was a performer, like a West End Broadway stage performer, who went over to perform. This might sound very unusual, but this is inspired actually by Edith Piaf, who was invited by the Germans to perform for the officers. And she said, "I'm only going to come if I get to perform for the POWs." And she went, and allegedly she did spy work while she was with the POWs that helped some of them escape. So Franny is going over accompanied by the Red Cross, and she's going to perform. And Franny and Louise become fast friends. But Franny meets a tragic end. She's found deceased outside the gate of one of the camps, and the explanation of a car accident or a car hitting her is something Louise has never believed. And so when Louise had seen this necklace because she'd seen Franny take it from one of the prisoners just hours before she was killed. And so Louise is convinced that if she can figure out where this necklace came from, she can figure out what happened to her friend. And the necklace dates back to a woman who was imprisoned in Levittown. So it's a dual narrative of both Louise, who is trying to figure out the necklace, and another woman, Helene, who is in Levittown, separated from her husband and trying to survive. And that's how the story comes together. So I can go on about a lot of things. I just want to share one more thought with you. And then I really want questions. Okay, can we do questions? So I'm often asked about the popularity of books set around the war, right? All of these books. I mean, I'm a consumer of them as well as a producer, and I love all of these books. And we talk about why are they so popular. And I just want to share a couple thoughts with you. The first is when we started talking, I told you about, when the wall sort of fell from communism and it was opened up. There's a lot of archival material that are available to us as researchers, I think, post-Cold War that we would not have had otherwise. Secondly, of course, this generation of survivors is really getting up there in years. And so there's this impetus to capture and tell their stories in whatever form we can while we can. And the last piece for me is this. As a writer, I want to take you and I want to put you in the shoes of my protagonist. And I want you to ask, what would I have done? And World War II has such dire circumstances and such stark choices that it is just incredibly fertile ground for storytelling. So I will answer questions about my books, about my writing, about my background, anything you want to talk about. My only caveat is this. I teach law school by day, and my answers are very long. What do you want to do? I'll tell you anything you want. What should we talk about? Yes.
Talk about how you do that. I mean, do you sit in front of a blank piece of paper for a while, or do you get an outline? How do you do that?
How do I write? So I don't know if you've heard other authors say that there are two types of writers, plotters and pantsers. Have you heard about this? Plotters are the dear souls who make an outline and they write sequentially and they make every sentence look nice before they move on. And you can tell from my voice and how I said that that's not me. I am a pantser, and pantser means seat of the pants. And so it's like this. It was inspired by, there's a really wonderful book on writing called Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg. And Natalie takes a Zen Buddhist approach to writing where you don't stop your hand to edit, you just keep going. And I was very inspired by this book. So when I have an idea, I open the computer and I go, bleh. And like, I think Natalie called it vomiting on the page. So really like all the words come out in this very random order for 3 or 4 months before they start to make sense. And so that's how I do it. It's a terrible process. I recommend the editing is very bad, but I'm also, though I must say, a reformed pantser, and here is why. Has anyone ever read my book, The Woman with the Blue Star? It was my pandemic book. It's a really special story. It's a little bit dark about some Jewish people who survived World War II by living in a sewer. It's a true story. And it was a hard book, and it was the one I wrote in isolation, a very hard book. So I wrote, before COVID, I wrote the first draft of that book, right? And I turned it into my editor, and she read it, and she went, no. And I was like, no, this is my 11th book. What do you mean no? And I had written a total stinker of a first draft. And I had to rewrite 95% of that book in 5 months. I never want to do that again. So now I do a little bit of outlining. Yes. Yeah.
When do you find time to write?
So it varies, right? So I really believe you must be very disciplined as a writer, because even after all of these years, no one, not my sainted husband or my amazing mom or anyone says, why don't you go take some time for writing, right? People just don't say that to us in our lives. Like, why don't you take some quiet creative space? Doesn't happen. So you kind of have to block off the time, but you also have to be sort of flexible on the days that you don't get. Like, I love 5 to 7 in the morning. I would take that 7 days a week if I could get it. But if I don't get it, I have to find some other time. So it'll really vary. On a teaching day for me, I teach at Rutgers Law. I might not get writing time, but there are like wide swaths of vacation. I'm gonna write in my hotel room tomorrow. Like I just write because I can't be. I've never been able to be too dear with my process, so I just have to write somewhere to get it done. Anne Lamott said that before children, she couldn't write if there were dirty dishes in the sink.
Yeah.
And after children, she could write if there was a corpse in the sink. Yes.
For this book, where did you go to research? How did you research it?
So research is an interesting question. And I'm going to tell you that to me, research is 3 questions, but I promise I won't answer them all tonight. So one time, I think it was actually in Connecticut many years ago, I was on a panel with 2 other authors, and the other authors wrote modern books. They didn't write historical fiction. And one of them said, just come open the computer and start working. And I was like, you what? Because when you write historical fiction, there's this whole other job of research. And I think when I think about research, there's 3 questions I think about. How do you do the research, which we're going to talk about? There's also another question of how do you weave the research into a story so you don't get a big dump of information that stops the plot just because I thought it was really interesting. And how do you not mess up the research, right? Because remember Game of Thrones, they left a water bottle in the scene. That's kind of what it's like when you make a mistake in a historical book. No matter, I have a copy editor, I have a historical fiction fact checker, all those things, and I still have mistakes in almost every book. So getting to your question of the how I do the research, I really would like to go to Europe multiple times for every book. That is almost never possible. And so and I'm going to tell you an anecdote about that in 1 second. I am forced to use a lot of other sources. So you use periodicals, photographs, memoirs, maps, correspondence. And if you're really lucky, there's someone who has written an amazing nonfiction book on your subject. And so there are 2 books, and I don't want to get the names wrong, by a woman named Sarah Geisinger. One is a photographic documentation of Levitan, and the other one is about the 3 camps that there were 3 of them like this in Paris. It was Levitan, Bassano, and the third one I'm not. And there's actual books of this is what it looked like in these dates. So there's some real factual information to back it up. So I have not been to Levitan. I was supposed to go for the Woman with the Blue Star. When I got that horrible news that it was a terrible book, I was going to make lemonade out of lemons. And I decided that that book's set in Poland, and I was going to go to Poland to shore up my research. And I thought, I booked a really nice trip to Poland, only mom with the good airfare and the good hotel. I booked that trip to Europe for March 11th of 2020. And so my publisher, when things started getting bad, got bad right after Italy. And I still have friends in the consulate there. I had meetings set up with like city officials to learn about the sewer lines. And my publisher said, we don't think you should go to Poland right now. I said, I'm going to Poland? And I'm going to wear one of those masks because we had no idea. The flight shut down on March 10th. And thank goodness they did, because I had an emergency appendectomy on March 11th. And I would have been in the air flying to Poland. So the reason I'm telling you this is I took my mom to England last year, but I haven't been back to the continent. So sometimes I have to work with the books.
Yes.
Yes. I'm just wondering if you looked into it all, the Jewish diaspora outside of Europe after World War II, and if that's something you've looked into or considered at all.
Do you have a particular place in mind?
Like Central America, South America, Caribbean.
I've definitely seen the stories there. For me, what's more personal is I've looked a little bit at China.
Oh.
So My grandmother, I did not lose any relatives in the Holocaust. My relatives were all out by the time it happened. But while everyone came in, through Ellis Island and Philadelphia and Baltimore, my grandmother's family fled east. So in the Tsarist era, when it also wasn't good for Jewish people, they fled across Russia with the railroad and landed in China. And my grandmother grew up in China, Harbin and Shanghai.
My daughter studied there,
Oh my
so
goodness.
she did a lot of research on it, but there are no Jews left in Harbin.
I imagine, and so she wasn't there during like the Holocaust ghetto. This was in like the 19 teens and 20s before she came over to the United States. So I wrote about her story in an anthology called Grand Central because she actually came to the United States. She lied about her age, got into the country to find your dad, and found kind of a surprise there. So yeah, so I've written about that diaspora.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm somebody that was picking the book up. Cover, and the cover on this is beautiful. How much influence do you have on the cover art of your book?
So really none. So can I talk about covers and titles because those are very close questions. Whether I control the cover and whether I control the title are sort of two very closely intertwined questions. So usually what happens with covers is that at some point when I'm not even done finishing the book, they're going to start asking me for ideas for the cover, and I will give them like imagery and that sort of thing. And there are books that they could show us 2 or 3 covers before they get it right, or 6 or 8 covers. This one, I believe they got really on the first try. I don't get involved, number one, because I have no visual aesthetic in life. That's not my lane. Like, I don't make anything look nice, not my house, not my children, and not myself. So I am not qualified to say what looks nice. It's just not my, I'm like, yeah, great. But sometimes they given us covers that were not sensitive enough or were not in line with the ethos, and then I'll say something. Also, they show the covers to a lot of their accounts, like the independent stores, the big box stores. They show covers to them to get their opinion and their buy-in. So by the time a cover has gotten to me, a lot of people have seen it already. And if it's bad, I know the market's going to correct it, if that makes any sense. So I adore this cover. Can I tell you about titles? Because it's kind of funny too. Almost no title of my book has ever stuck. Like I'd have to think back and I'd be hard pressed. I have a working title. It's never any good. And then we start like churning this list of words and phrases and titles and trying to figure them out. This book was almost called The Department of Stolen Heirlooms, if you can imagine. Totally, very, very different. And then you're like, can we use Paris again? We can't use library because there's a lot of books with library. There's all those conversations that go on. My favorite, it's a little graphic. My favorite title story is that I wrote a book years ago. Working title was The Anniversary Clock. And it was with a different publisher. I had baby twins because my kids are in high school now, but I had baby twins. And I'm sorry, but if you're feeding baby twins, you don't have any free hands. That's all I'm going to say, right? So I have twins and the phone rings and it's the big bubby editor from the big publisher. And I pick up the phone and I'm like, yes, God, it was like this moment while I have baby twins. And she said, we hate the title The Anniversary Clock. We're changing it to The Things We Cherish, Click. And that's how that book got a title. So sometimes it's with my current publisher, it's very collaborative. But again, they show it to people and they get input on titles.
Yes.
The authors talk about how they develop their characters, and sometimes they've said that the characters almost control them. That once the characters get going, they sort of say, "Well, I didn't know the character was going to do that." And I just wonder, when you're doing historical fiction, is that possible, or do you follow the character, or do you create the character to fit in with this history?
So I think my answer is not unique to historical fiction because I'm still writing fictitious characters. So I think it's going to be the same. Normally, I'm not like, is it wrong to say I'm not super artsy? So I'm not doing like a lot of character sketches or anything. I heard someone once say that plotters, they build scaffolding, but pantsers, it's like an archaeological dig where you pick something up and you're dusting it off. So I often meet my characters through the pantsing, like through the words. I don't really do it separately, but I will tell you one story. When I wrote Commandant's Girl, I really thought that was a freestanding book, not one of three like it is now. And one morning when I was brushing my teeth, like when all the good ideas happen, right? One of the characters from Commandant's Girl like appeared in my bathroom and said, "It's my turn." And I thought, I didn't even know you made it out of book one. And I don't know if I liked her. But she wound up having the next book. And so that time it definitely happened. Yes. Yes. True. It could happen again. Yes.
Now, I haven't read the Commandant's Girl for years.
Yes.
The first book that I picked up.
Yes.
And I was really drawn to her taking on a Catholic identity.
Yes.
I know there were people in the Catholic Church that were part of the resistance throughout. With that main character specifically, was her cover story, like her identity, not just based on research, or just like the
So what she did was fictitious, right? Because it very much came out of my writing that she had an assumed identity and she was protecting a child. And so that evolved very fictitiously and organically in the writing. But what was real in Commandant's Girl was that there was this Jewish resistance that operated inside and outside of the ghetto, and they undertook to blow up a cafe with Germans in it. And that's based on the real story. There's a wonderful nonfiction story called Justina's Narrative about that. And it actually was written on like toilet paper and put in a wall. I mean, by one of the people, like, so in prison. So that part was real, but my characters are always fictitious. And I have to say, I'm very cautious because I think historical fiction authors can get in trouble by staking too large a claim around what is true in their books, right? So, so whenever somebody says based on a true story, I cross it out and I say inspired by, because I always want to be kind. Like if I'm going to change something in my book, I'm changing it from a furniture store to a department store. I'm going to tell you that I changed it in the author's note. I don't want you thinking that's real. And so Codename Sapphire, my last book, we see Jewish people turned away from North America. And you might recognize that as the story of the doomed ship, the St. Louis. However, I needed different dates for my story. And so I didn't call it the St. Louis. I changed it for. Yes, ma'am.
About how long does it take you to write a book?
So I used to be really quick. Like I used to be book a year. I've gotten older. The books have gotten harder. And I don't always want to crawl into my office at Rutgers at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning like I used to do. Be there. I've got a couple years left with the kids home, but it's more than that. Right now, my books come out every 2 years right now. So let's say it takes me like 18 months to get something done. I really prefer it, not just creatively, but also frankly commercially, because I can tell you, especially today, which is launch day, it is taking so much out of my world to launch a book now as things have gotten better and bigger and wonderful. And I'm not complaining at all. I love it. I love every second, but I'm on the road, which is, a thing for my family. All the people who are supporting me online, all the authors, we support each other. And I simply can't ask this kind of thing from people every single year. And like, hey, I've got a book. Hey, it takes a little bit of the specialness out of it for me. Like, God bless my friends who write 2 books a year. But I'm at every 2 years and very, very happy with that. I'd rather step back and pay it forward a little bit for some people and then have my turn when it comes around. So.
Is there any talk of turning any of your stories into something on the big screen or small screen?
Ooh, so this is like this is a bad news, good news, bad news story. Ready? So for many years, I would have said to you, from your mouth to God's ears, because nothing had happened. And then right before the pandemic in 2019, things happened very abruptly for Lost Girls in Paris. It was like with Paramount and it was amazing. And then there was the writer's strike and it wasn't. And I had the best screenwriter. I had a really real director who had like directed This Is Us. And I had my screenwriter, she wrote Wicked. Right. So and she is amazing. Like she sent my kids Wicked merch, like she's amazing. And she was the best storyteller I've ever heard. And I sat in on those pitch meetings with the slide decks. And this was like last summer. Crickets. because nobody wants to make a period piece right now, either TV or movie. They were like, you can't call it a period piece. And so it didn't go anywhere despite having the most amazing team. So I hope those things will circle around again. Right now it's dead in the water, which is why I can tell you about it.
Why are they?
Everything's off historical fiction right now. I don't know, right? I know, right? I know. If I could put a dragon in there, maybe. Just kidding, just kidding. Love those books. Yes,
Totally different question, for you as a Jewish author.
yes.
I was listening to the essays and I'm being Jewish now, and by so many Jewish authors who've been canceled at talks at major bookstores and had problems with publishers not wanting to even publish their stuff. Have you run into any of that?
So I have not. I really am so supportive of what Zibby has done with On Being Jewish Now and all of my author friends. And I stand very, my heart is with them and all of that. I have not experienced anything, probably because I have not been on the road much since everything started happening. I will tell you one small story. On October 7th of 23, I was on the way to the Morristown Festival of the Book from South Jersey to North Jersey. A car was driving me up there as everything was like unfolding, and I'm seeing this on my phone. And so that really gave me pause. Like, what are we going to do? How can we talk about books after everything that's going on? And obviously we have continued and we get a great deal of community from talking about books. But it's a hard time for a lot of people. And so I haven't been on tour to have it happen. My publisher is supportive. It has affected my thought process a lot. So I don't want to, I do a lot of Jewish touring for the Jewish Book Council. I don't want to do a big Jewish event and then hop in with an Uber. Like I think about it, right? They wanted me to hire a social media person. I said, as a Jewish author, I can't have someone putting puppies like up on my social, so it affects the things we do. But we have to kind of put shoulder to the wind a little bit and do our stuff, so that's my take on it. We'll see. I'll let you know. This is my first day of tour, so I'll let you know if I get any protests or anything.
Seeing you next week at Barnes and Noble
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
Yeah, it's amazing. Who did I miss? I saw hands. Yes.
I wanted to have you delve into your time in Poland and when you worked out there and how you met that community of Jewish Holocaust survivors and how does that fit into your writing?
So it influenced me so much. So I got to Poland, right? And I had grown up in New Jersey in a Reform community where I went to the synagogue like twice a year. And I go to Poland and it's all Orthodox and I'm going to their shul every Friday and to their rabbi's house for lunch. And it was this whole education for me. But they really opened up to me in a way that was very special. And this just a couple months ago, the head of the Jewish community in Krakow died, and I was heartbroken because I really wanted to get back there to see him. But the elderly folks I know who have passed have been they're 100. You know what I mean? These things have not been untimely. It's just a huge piece of my heart, and it's still there. The Jewish community over there was very small. When I got to Poland, I don't think there were 1,000 Jewish people left in Poland. And they used to say, it's horrible. They used to say, last Jew out of Poland, turn out the lights. And what they meant is that the survivors were going to die off and that would be it. The opposite has happened. They have a JCC, they've returned property. People have found their roots. People have moved there from Russia. And the community is way bigger and more vibrant than when I lived there. So I don't think it's ever going to be Brooklyn again, but it has certainly endured. Obviously, there are complicated questions about anti-Semitism and those things, but I really believe that the secret is to engage the next generation over there in dialogue. Yes.
If you ever have a chance to read, who are your favorite authors?
Oh goodness, I just had to answer this question because I'm being gifted a book and I was thinking about what do I want to read. I read everything. I read I read the thrillers, I read the historical. So I read everything. Has anyone read, if you like World War II, has anyone read Ron Balson?
Yeah,
All right, all right.
Every single book.
I'm being honest, I normally support my female authors, my Kristen Harmels and my Kate Quinns, and I love all my female authors. But Ron's a mensch, and he is like the closest I get to spending time with my dad, who's no longer here, and he's just a real doll. And his books are amazing. Like my mom might like his books better than mine because they're so well, actually, they're so well researched. You should try Ron Balson for World War II. Also, I have a little funny story about that. I know I'm gonna get pulled off stage, but I have a funny story. So I was driving my kids to some activity 2 or 3 years ago, like parkour or something like that. And it's a rainy Tuesday night, and there's a mom sitting there reading a book. And I look at the book, of course, and it's not my book, but it's one of Ron's books. And I walked up to her and I said, "Oh, do you like that book?" She said, "I love it." She said, "And if you like books by Ron Balson," she said to me, "you should read Pam Jenoff." And my time, did I talk too long? How about one more question?
I wanna know if you told her it was you.
I did tell her. I said, "Did you just say that?" And we got a great chuckle out of it. Yes, restaurants. So I do want to say thank you so much. This is amazing to start off my tour like this. And also, I know we're gonna talk when you come up, but please find me online so we can continue the conversation. I don't post politics. I'm on all the forums, but I pretty much post about other authors' books after I get past this week and my Yellow Lab scoop. All right, thank you so much.